The dinner was one of those fancy charity events, white linen, crystal glasses, and people dressed like they were auditioning for perfection. She, Olivia Grant, was the star guest, a successful interior designer with 1 million followers and a confidence that could light up any room. The single dad, Ethan Cole, was there because his boss had invited him. He wasn't supposed to stand out, just fill a seat, look polite, and keep quiet. And that's exactly what he was doing until Olivia noticed how out of place he looked. He wasn't laughing at the jokes. He wasn't checking his phone. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was just there. Calm, quiet, almost invisible. When she made that little joke about him, she didn't mean harm. Not really. She was just being funny, or at least, she thought she was. But when he looked up for the first time that evening, their eyes met for half a second. His gaze wasn't angry, or embarrassed. It was something else, something steady. Like a man who's seen storms worse than words. He said softly, "Sometimes silence says more than people think." And that was it. He went back to his meal, and the table went quiet. She felt her face warm, embarrassed, but also curious. Dinner went on. The room buzzed with laughter and music. People clinked glasses and took selfies. But she couldn't stop glancing toward him. He didn't seem nervous or annoyed. He was just sitting there, occasionally smiling when someone spoke to him. She learned later he was a construction worker, a widower, raising a little girl on his own. She told herself she didn't care. But something about that quiet strength unsettled her. Maybe because deep down, she knew she'd never met a man who didn't need to prove anything. When dessert was served, a commotion broke out near the kitchen doors. A server dropped a tray of glasses, shattering them across the floor. Everyone gasped and turned, including Olivia. But then it happened. One of the heavy iron chandeliers above the dining area suddenly creaked, one of its chains snapping loose. Nobody saw it except Ethan. He shot to his feet, eyes locking on the swaying fixture above Olivia's head. In a split second, he sprinted across the room, grabbed her chair, and yanked her backward just as the chandelier crashed down exactly where she'd been sitting seconds ago. The sound was deafening. Screams filled the hall. The lights flickered, and glass rained over the table. When she opened her eyes, she found herself on the floor, his arm around her, shielding her from the shards. His hand was bleeding. She couldn't breathe for a moment, not because of fear, but because of what she'd just realized. The man she'd mocked had just saved her life. She wanted to say something, "Thank you, I'm sorry," anything, but the words tangled in her throat. He looked at her briefly, made sure she was okay, then stood up and helped others around them. When security and staff rushed in, he quietly slipped out of the chaos. No boasting. No scene. He just left, like it didn't matter. But it did. To her, it mattered more than anything. That night, Olivia couldn't sleep. His face kept flashing in her mind, not just the moment he saved her, but the calm in his eyes, the way he moved without hesitation. She found out from the event organizer that his name was Ethan Cole, that he'd lost his wife 3 years ago in a car accident, and had a 7-year-old daughter named Grace. He never talked much about it, they said. But everyone at work respected him. He was quiet because life had taught him that words weren't everything. Actions were. Days later, she visited the construction site where he worked. She didn't even know why she was there. Maybe guilt. Maybe gratitude. Maybe both. He looked surprised when she showed up, standing there in her neat coat and heels against the backdrop of dust and noise. "You didn't have to come," he said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "I did," she replied. "I never said thank you." He smiled a little. "You just did." She wanted to apologize too for the way she treated him. But before she could, his daughter ran up to him, a little girl with brown curls and bright eyes. She wrapped her arms around his leg, laughing. He picked her up, and in that simple moment, Olivia saw everything: the love, the strength, the reason he carried himself the way he did. Over the next few weeks, she found herself visiting more often. At first, it was excuses, dropping off food, checking on his hand injury. But slowly, something unspoken began to grow between them. She'd sit on a bench nearby while he worked, watching how carefully he moved, how patient he was with others. He never talked much, but when he did, every word carried meaning. And for the first time in her life, Olivia, who'd built her world around noise, approval, and attention, began to understand the quiet. She started volunteering at the local shelter where he took his daughter on weekends. They painted walls, served food, and talked about life, not the glamorous kind, but the real one. She learned about his late wife, about how he'd promised to raise Grace to be strong and kind. And he learned about her, how behind all the success, she'd always felt alone. Months passed, and something changed in both of them. She wasn't the woman who mocked people to feel powerful anymore. And he wasn't just the quiet man at the table, he was the reminder that sometimes, the strongest voices don't shout. One evening, as the sun set behind the half-finished building he was working on, she stood beside him. "You know," she said softly, "that night at dinner. I thought you were weak because you were quiet. But now I know silence can be strength." He looked at her for a long moment, then smiled. "And sometimes," he said, "it just takes the right person to hear it." She laughed, and for the first time in a long while, her laughter wasn't for attention. It was real. As they walked home together, little Grace skipping ahead of them, Olivia looked up at the sky, the same color as the chandelier glass that night, and thought how strange life was. How one cruel moment could lead to kindness, how silence could teach love, and how a single act of courage could change two hearts forever.